There was a steak knife sticking out of my front tire, a pool of air hissing out like a dying animal, and a glittery pink note duct-taped to the windshield that read, "Next time, stay out of my spot. HOA Vice President Karen." I hadn't even had my coffee yet, but I was already imagining how it would taste in court when she found out she'd just committed felony property damage on a car that belonged to the county police chief. It all started 3 days earlier when my ancient pickup finally gave out. Not a dramatic explosion or fireball or anything worthy of a Viking funeral, just a sad sputter and a puff of smoke in the Wendy's parking lot. I was house-sitting for my sister while she was in Italy, and her husband, Mike, kindly lent me his spare car. He said it was his work ride, but didn't give me the details. I figured it was just a government surplus sedan or something. Wrong. Dead wrong. This thing was smooth, black, polished within an inch of its life, and had those government plates that make people suddenly remember how seat belts work. I parked it in the designated guest spot near my sister's unit and went inside to reheat some pizza and scroll Reddit. Nothing special. Or so I thought. I met Karen the next morning while drinking coffee on the porch and watching a squirrel attempt parkour between trash cans. She walked up like she owned gravity itself. Oversized visor, clipboard, sandals that somehow made noise on concrete, and the world's most obnoxious mug. HOA boss babe. She pointed at the black car and said, "You need to move. That's my spot." I blinked. Sorry? I parked in the guest space. It's not labeled. She flipped her clipboard dramatically. It's not labeled because everyone knows it's mine. It's been mine for 6 years. I was promised that space verbally when I became vice president. You know verbal promises don't really hold up in HOA land, right? Her face twitched. Are you even a resident here? Nope, I said cheerfully. Just house-sitting for my sister. I cleared it with the HOA months ago. She narrowed her eyes. What's your sister's name? I told her. She sniffed like it tasted bad. Ugh. Her. Typical. Typical what? I asked. She didn't answer. She just stared at the car again, clearly offended by its existence. That car looks suspicious. Government tags? Are you spying on someone? Lady, I can barely spell HOA. I'm not spying on anything. She stormed off, but not before tossing over her shoulder. That space better be empty tomorrow or I'll take care of it myself. I didn't think she meant slash my tires take care of it. I thought she meant she'd send an angry email or call an unnecessary emergency board meeting about parking integrity. Karen vibes, but nothing felony level. The next morning told a different story. I opened the front door and was met with a weird whistling sound, 4 flat tires, all deflated into sad little pancakes. I walked over in disbelief, knelt down, and that's when I saw it. A steak knife shoved clean into the rubber. The handle was neon pink with glitter and little rhinestones that spelled out Queen. No attempt to hide it. No subtlety. And that note, duct-taped, not just slipped under the wiper like a normal passive-aggressive coward, but duct-taped to the windshield. Karen wasn't just declaring war. She was signing her name to it with flair. I took a picture. Then another. Then a selfie with the note, because this was going straight to r/EntitledPeople if I lived to tell the tale. Mike arrived about 15 minutes later. He was coming by to drop off a charger I left in his truck. I waved him over, and he walked up with a grin, until he saw the tires. "What the hell happened?" he asked, crouching down. "Your neighbor Karen," I said, still holding the note. "She says it was her spot." He read the note, frowned, then looked at the car like it had just betrayed him. "This is bad." "Yeah, I know tires aren't cheap." "No, Jake. This car is my department-issued vehicle. It's under surveillance equipment and registered to the sheriff's fleet. She just vandalized a government vehicle." I blinked. "Wait, you're not just a city cop?" "I'm the county police chief." I choked on nothing. "The chief?" "Yep." We both looked at the note again. Mike pulled out his phone and opened an app I'd never seen before. He tapped a few buttons, then pointed to a blinking red dot on the screen. That's the dashcam. Still recording. And it's motion triggered. We spent the next 10 minutes watching Karen on video, strutting up in her robe and slippers at 5:48 a.m., pulling the knife out of her purse like it was just another chore, and stabbing each tire methodically. She even paused to admire her work after the last one, hands on hips like she just finished a painting. Then she laughed. Mike tapped the screen. That's all we need. Are you pressing charges? I asked. Oh, we're going way beyond that, he said with a small, dangerous smile. We're pressing charges. We're getting her HOA seat vacated. And we're going to make sure everyone in this zip code sees the video. It was in that moment I realized, Karen didn't just mess with my borrowed ride. She slashed the tires of the wrong car. A car that came with government insurance, a hidden camera, and a police chief who had the patience of a monk and the vengeful planning ability of a Bond villain. I grinned. Mind if I stay a few more days? Mike slapped my back. Stay as long as you want. This neighborhood's about to get real entertaining. And that's how a quiet week of house-sitting turned into the beginning of HOA Armageddon. Karen had no idea her kingdom was about to crumble, tire by tire, meeting by meeting, lie by lie. Mike didn't waste any time. Less than an hour after we watched Karen's early morning tire-slashing debut, he was in full-on comm-destroyer mode. I expected some furious calls or stern yelling, but nope. He just quietly gathered his things, made a few phone calls, and printed out some forms from the little wireless printer my sister keeps next to the wine rack. The man had the composure of a monk who moonlights as a bounty hunter. When I asked what he was doing, he said, starting the paper trail. This isn't her first offense, is it? It wasn't a question. He could smell it. You don't go from neighborly side-eye to stabbing tires unless you've already decided the law doesn't apply to you. By lunchtime, we had 3 printed copies of the footage, one on a USB, one on a laptop, and one loaded into Mike's department database. And then Mike turned to me and said, let's see how the HOA handles this first. If they do the right thing, maybe she gets a slap on the wrist. If not, he didn't finish that sentence. He just smiled. And it was not a friendly smile. We walked down to the HOA office, a small prefab building squished between the clubhouse and a suspiciously dry fountain. There was a buzzer and a sign that said, no walk-ins without appointment, which Mike ignored entirely. He pressed the button and held it down for a full 10 seconds. A voice crackled from the intercom. This is HOA property, and unless you have an appointment, you'll need to. It's about criminal damage to government property, Mike said, still holding the button. And we've got the footage. The door opened faster than I thought possible. Inside was a small waiting room filled with outdated magazines and an artificial plant that had seen better days. Behind the front desk sat a middle-aged man who looked like he regretted every life decision that brought him to this HOA post. His name tag read, Gary, Admin Assistant. Gary looked at us like we were delivering a subpoena. Mike explained everything calmly. Showed the footage. Explained that the car was not just a personal vehicle, but one belonging to the sheriff's department, currently assigned to him as chief of police. Gary's eyes kept widening until they hit some invisible maximum. He asked us to wait while he called the HOA president. That's when we realized something hilarious. The HOA president was on vacation. And Karen? She was acting as interim president. The meeting was scheduled for the next day at 5 p.m. According to the bylaws, all reported incidents had to be reviewed by the board within 24 hours if property damage was involved. Karen would be running the meeting that determined if Karen had violated the rules. It was like inviting the fox to inspect the henhouse break-in. Mike and I exchanged looks. I could already see the trap forming in his mind. The next 24 hours were preparation time. Mike dug into public records. I wandered the neighborhood with a borrowed iced tea and casual curiosity, chatting with residents. Turns out, Karen had been running this place like a petty dictatorship for years. She'd issued fines for wind chimes, outlawed chalk drawings by kids on sidewalks, and once made someone take down a Halloween skeleton for being too suggestive. Residents had stories. So many stories. I started taking note. One older gentleman offered to email me a spreadsheet he'd been keeping. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The HOA meeting was held in the community center. Folding chairs, a single mic, and a long table at the front with name tags. Karen sat dead center, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a salmon-colored power suit, a pin that read Civic Duty, and an expression of smug control. As soon as we entered, I saw her nostrils flare. She didn't expect us to show. Definitely didn't expect Mike to be wearing his badge on a chain around his neck. We sat in the front row. Karen cleared her throat and said, "We'll now begin the disciplinary hearing regarding the unauthorized use of HOA guest parking and the unfortunate incident of tire deflation." Tire deflation. Like the tires got sad and gave up. Mike raised his hand. "Actually, I'd like to present evidence of criminal vandalism and property damage. We have video footage, and the vehicle in question belongs to law enforcement." Karen tried to wave him off. "This is an internal HOA matter. We're not a court." Mike stood up, walked to the mic, and plugged in the USB stick. He didn't say anything else. He just played the video. The silence that followed was beautiful. You could hear a pin drop. Then a neighbor in the third row muttered, "Oh my God, she's actually stabbing it." Another said, "Is that a wine opener?" And someone up front coughed loudly and whispered, "She dressed up for this?" Karen's face had frozen. She tried to speak, but the words came out like spaghetti through a paper shredder. "That's not, I mean, this video isn't, that could be anyone." Mike held up the pink knife handle in a plastic evidence bag. "We pulled it from the tire. It's been submitted for prints. But I think we can all agree the matching rhinestone queen handle narrows it down." The room was dead silent again. Then Gary, sweet, stunned Gary, leaned forward and said, "I move to suspend Vice President Karen pending investigation." Everyone voted yes. Except Karen, of course, who shouted, "This is a conspiracy. You're all just jealous. He's not even a real cop." Mike pulled out his badge again. "County Sheriff's Department. Chief of Police. Would you like to test that theory in front of a judge?" Karen stood up, shaking. She tried to storm out, but the crowd had begun to shift. Cameras were out. Phones recording. She pushed past an elderly couple, tripped over someone's purse strap, and left the building red-faced and furious. Someone clapped. Then another person. Pretty soon, half the room was applauding. Mike turned to me, voice low. "This isn't over. She's going to retaliate. People like her don't just disappear quietly." I nodded, adrenaline still buzzing. "What do we do?" He smiled again. That same not-so-friendly smile. Now we get the neighborhood on our side. And we start digging. You know what you said about her running this place like a petty queen? Well, every queen has a treasury. Let's find out what she's been hiding." And just like that, we weren't just reacting anymore. We were going on offense. And Karen had no idea how many enemies she'd made until they all stood up, one by one, behind the mic. Karen disappeared for 2 days after the HOA meeting meltdown. Not in a missing persons kind of way, more like a Disney villain retreating into her lair to conjure up her next scheme. Her car was still parked crookedly across 2 spaces, but the blinds in her townhouse stayed shut and no one saw her outside. People assumed she was licking her wounds or drafting up some elaborate retaliation involving more glitter knives and legal threats. Mike, however, saw it differently. "She's quiet because she's panicking," he said. "But panicking people make stupid moves. We just have to be ready." Meanwhile, the video of her tire-slashing extravaganza had begun making the rounds. First it was shared in the neighborhood group chat. Then it ended up on the town subreddit. A day later, someone posted it to Facebook with a caption that read, "Karen ruins her own life in under 60 seconds. The post had thousands of views before it mysteriously vanished. Rumor had it Karen had a lawyer send takedown requests. Too little, too late. Mike kept things professional on the legal front. He filed the criminal complaint, submitted the footage and evidence bag, and let the system do its thing. But behind the scenes, we were collecting something even more powerful than legal documents: stories. Neighbor after neighbor came to us, some timid, others furious, and each one with a tale. One woman said Karen fined her for having too many tulips in her front garden. A dad was charged $200 for letting his daughter set up a lemonade stand during the community garage sale. A couple had been sent violation letters for using non-compliant lawn chairs. And my personal favorite, a guy was fined for hanging his American flag too confidently. What did that even mean? No one knew. But the deeper we dug, the darker it got. Turns out, Karen wasn't just power-tripping, she was also very possibly embezzling money. A retired IRS agent named Bill, who lived in a corner unit and had more spreadsheets than hobbies, showed us a year's worth of HOA expenses. That's when things really started to reek. There were vague entries like executive refreshments, $480, charged monthly, legal consulting, $1,200, with no corresponding case numbers, and a $900 charge labeled emergency infrastructure, that turned out to be for a new jacuzzi in Karen's backyard. Mike took one look at it and said, "This is enough to launch a civil audit." We weren't just dealing with a petty tyrant anymore. We were dealing with someone who'd built a mini-empire out of unchecked authority and bad font. Karen had ruled the HOA like it was her personal fiefdom. The residents weren't neighbors, they were subjects. And now they were all ready to riot. Figuratively, at least. One guy did try to get a recall vote going in the parking lot, but his markers ran out and someone called him a socialist. The HOA board had already voted to suspend Karen, but her cronies, two particularly bland men named Curtis and Ron, still had influence. They called an emergency meeting to restore order. Mike and I showed up early, along with about 30 residents who were sick of paying fines for breathing too loudly on Tuesday afternoons. Curtis tried to run the meeting like nothing had happened. "We're here to address recent unrest caused by misinformation and online slander," he said, reading from a paper like he was auditioning for a villain in a high school play. Mike didn't let him finish. "Actually, we're here to vote on a full financial audit and to formally recommend the removal of all board members complicit in Karen's actions. We have witness statements, receipts, and a community ready to clean house." Curtis blinked like he'd never heard someone challenge his authority without stuttering. Ron shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A woman in the back stood up and said, "You made me pay a $75 fine for putting a fall wreath on my door in August. You're lucky I didn't throw the wreath at your head." Things got loud fast. Voices rising, people standing, some waving printed-out violations they'd saved like receipts for revenge. Curtis tried to call for order, but it was useless. The crowd had momentum. They were tired of being bullied, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of Karen's reign of aesthetic terror. And finally they saw a path forward. One guy suggested a temporary transition board composed of volunteers until proper elections could be held. Another proposed public financial reviews posted monthly on the community bulletin board. Someone else offered to manage a digital forum where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. It was beautiful chaos. Mike let them talk, steering only when needed. He was the quiet general in a war that didn't need weapons, just transparency and a working projector. Curtis and Ron? They resigned mid-meeting. Walked out, red-faced and muttering about how, "This isn't how things are done." Someone tossed a glittery HOA mug after them. It missed, but the symbolism was perfect. After the meeting, we gathered outside and people stayed for hours. There were cookies. Someone set up a Bluetooth speaker. It turned into a block party. Children played, adults laughed, and for the first time since Karen took power, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again. But it wasn't over. Mike warned us that civil cases take time, and Karen still had legal tricks up her sleeve. Sure enough, the very next morning, Karen filed a restraining order against Mike for harassment and intimidation, claiming he had threatened her livelihood and weaponized his badge. It was a desperate move. Transparent. But it complicated things. Mike had to go through formal hearings just to prove that his actions were purely lawful and within the bounds of his duty. It wasn't hard to do, but it meant delays. We weren't deterred. In fact, we doubled down. The community formed a watchdog committee, led by none other than Bill the spreadsheet wizard. He started combing through 3 years of budgets, looking for every single misuse of funds. They found entries that bordered on criminal. HOA money spent on catered brunches, salon visits, online shopping listed as office supplies. One receipt was for $400 worth of aromatherapy diffusers. Mike joked that maybe that's how Karen fueled her rage: lavender oil and corruption. By the end of the week, the new interim board officially voted to sue Karen for misappropriation of funds. A formal letter was delivered to her door. She didn't answer it, but a neighbor reported hearing screaming through the walls. The kind of screaming that sounded like someone realizing the power they'd clung to was now a noose tightening around their neck. Mike remained calm, methodical, focused. But one evening, over beers on the porch, he admitted something. "I've dealt with murderers, drug lords, and gang leaders," he said. "But I've never seen anyone as smug and slippery as a petty suburban dictator with HOA access and no oversight." I laughed. "Yeah, but you've got something she doesn't." "What's that?" "The neighborhood. And facts. And also a badge." Mike nodded. "That helps too." The battle wasn't over. Karen wasn't done. But her empire was already crumbling, brick by fraudulent brick. And we were just getting started. Karen made one last desperate attempt to cling to power, and it was as ridiculous as it was revealing. On the morning of the neighborhood's annual 4th of July barbecue, the most attended community event of the year, she marched out onto her front lawn with a microphone, a folding table, and a stack of printouts. She called it her truth booth. Her plan, apparently, was to win back public support by handing out flyers with phrases like media manipulation and fake evidence, and a big, grainy screenshot of the tire footage with the caption, "Not me." She even wore a t-shirt that said, "HOA Justice Warrior," as if she was the victim of some vast neighborhood conspiracy involving Mike, me, and the ghost of her wine opener. But what Karen didn't realize was that the world had already moved on. The community had tasted freedom. Kids were riding scooters again without fear of getting HOA violation slip. Sidewalk chalk art had exploded in colorful rebellion. People were even daring to plant whatever flowers they wanted, no pre-approved petal colors in sight. Her lawn table campaign drew a small audience at first, mostly people passing by out of curiosity. But after about 10 minutes, folks began drifting toward the smell of burgers and actual human joy over by the clubhouse. Karen was left shouting into a mic while 2 bored pigeons stared at her from the roof. That was the moment Mike chose to strike. He hadn't planned to make a big scene at the barbecue. In fact, he'd told me he wanted the law to speak for itself. But something about Karen's self-pity roadshow must have flipped the switch. Around 2 p.m., just as the raffle drawing for a free grill was wrapping up, 2 patrol cars rolled into the community lot. Not sirens blaring, not guns out dramatic. Just calm, precise, and incredibly inconvenient for Karen's narrative. She didn't see them at first. She was mid-rant about how HOA funds had always gone toward administrative wellness, which, translated from Karen essay, meant foot massages and crystal therapy. But when the officers approached her table, all the air drained from her face. One officer politely asked, "Are you Karen Whitmore?" She nodded once, too stunned to speak. "You're being served with a summons regarding HOA financial mismanagement, and you're under arrest for destruction of government property. Please turn around." The barbecue turned into a silent movie for a few seconds. Everyone froze, holding soda cups and half-eaten hot dogs, trying to make sure they weren't hallucinating. Then, as the cuffs clicked onto Karen's wrists, someone in the crowd let out a quiet whoa. A teenager near the grill muttered, "No way." Then the dam broke. Phones came out. Photos were taken. Videos filmed. The entire scene, from Karen's stunned silence to her flustered muttering, "This is a mistake, this is all lies, they're framing me," was documented in high definition. Someone started playing Bad Boys on a Bluetooth speaker, and even the cops chuckled. Karen was led away without incident, but not without fanfare. As she was guided toward the patrol car, a toddler pointed at her and asked loudly, "Is that the mean lady who said I couldn't use chalk?" His mom just nodded. Back at the grill area, nobody quite knew what to do for a few seconds. But then someone clinked their soda can against a plastic cup and said, "Well, who wants cake?" And just like that, the celebration resumed. Hot dogs were eaten, the raffle prize was claimed, and the Karen saga officially entered legend. The aftermath was swift. News traveled fast. That night, the HOA Facebook group exploded with posts. Memes were made. One popular image showed Karen behind bars with the caption, "Unauthorized use of red, white, and blue." Another was just a screenshot from the video labeled "Queen of HOA, long may she not reign." With Karen now fully removed, both literally and administratively, the HOA was officially leaderless. The board met within 48 hours and appointed a temporary committee until a full election could be organized. Surprisingly, the most endorsed candidate wasn't someone ambitious or loud. It was Mike's mom. Yes, his retired, lemonade-loving, ex-K9 handler mother. She'd lived in the neighborhood for 10 years and had never once attended a meeting until now. Her platform? No nonsense. No glitter knives. Just good fences and better potlucks. She won in a landslide. Under her leadership, things changed fast. Fines were reviewed. Suspensions lifted. A garden committee was formed with actual residents voting on rules. Transparency became the new normal, and for the first time in years, people actually wanted to participate in the HOA. Mike even helped set up a digital portal so all spending was visible to every homeowner, updated monthly. There were no more shadow expenses labeled miscellaneous enlightenment. Karen's trial began a few weeks later. She pleaded not guilty, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. The dashcam footage, the pink knife, the printed HOA budgets showing her using community funds for what one judge called a lifestyle of suburban excess. Her attorney tried to argue she had been under immense emotional stress from unreasonable residents, but that defense died a quick death when 30 witnesses testified against her. The judge sentenced her to community service, a hefty restitution payment, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board within the state. When asked if she had anything to say, Karen stared ahead and muttered something about ungrateful neighbors and corrupt cops, which just solidified the verdict. What truly sealed her fate, though, wasn't the court case or the jail time. It was the public shaming. Her arrest video went viral. Local news picked it up, then national blogs, and eventually daytime TV hosts were making jokes about the HOA Karen who couldn't handle a guest parking spot. She tried to claim defamation, but the footage spoke louder than she ever could. Her family quietly distanced themselves, and she eventually moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Rumor had it she relocated to a small town 2 states over, where no one knew her name and, hopefully, nobody left guest parking unguarded. As for me, I got my truck fixed, finished my house-sitting gig, and moved back to my own place. But I still visited the neighborhood now and then. They had a new sense of peace. People smiled more, laughed louder. Even the birds seemed less anxious. Mike and I would occasionally sit on the porch, sipping beers and watching the sunset while a few kids zoomed past on scooters. "You ever think about what would have happened if I parked somewhere else?" I asked once. Mike nodded. She'd still be running things. Still drinking HOA-funded smoothies while threatening to evict someone for a wind chime. Funny how one petty act started a whole revolution. He chuckled. That's the thing about tyrants. They always overreach. Sometimes all it takes is one tire, one camera, and the right kind of dumb. We raised our bottles in a quiet toast. To guest parking. To neighborhood rebellions. And to the glitter knife that took down an empire. The neighborhood had changed so much, it was almost hard to believe it had once been ruled by a clipboard-wielding tyrant in oversized sunglasses. With Karen gone, and her allies either resigned or publicly humiliated, it was like a heavy fog had lifted. People no longer whispered complaints in driveways or shared quiet sighs of frustration at mailboxes. Now they stopped to chat, swapped recipes, traded plants, and offered to help one another with chores that would have once drawn a violation notice. The HOA hadn't just been reset, it had been reborn. Mike's mom, officially elected president by a unanimous vote, ran the board with the efficiency of a field commander and the warmth of a favorite aunt. She kept the rules clear, the meetings short, and the spending transparent. Her biggest agenda items were repaving the walking trail and organizing more community events, two things Karen had called distractions from protocol. The new board meetings were casual, even fun. People brought snacks. Someone brought a ukulele once. There were still rules, sure, but they made sense. No one got fined for growing sunflowers or letting their kids sell lemonade anymore. In fact, the kids had formed a lemonade league, and now had rotating stands on weekends. They even had their own laminated IDs. It was absurd and wholesome and perfect. Karen, meanwhile, had faded into a kind of myth. Occasionally, someone would joke about spotting her ghost near the guest parking space, holding a glitter knife and muttering about bylaws. Others swore they saw her at the dollar store in a nearby town, wearing sunglasses and a scarf like a movie villain in hiding. But nobody really knew. The only confirmed update came from a former neighbor who said she was living in a rental duplex 2 counties over, where she reportedly tried to join a new HOA and was immediately rejected after a simple Google search. Her name had become synonymous with everything not to do in a community. She was the cautionary tale, the urban legend, the anti-role model. As for me, I eventually moved back into my own place, but I stayed in close touch with the neighborhood. The entire experience had bonded me with people I barely knew before. I'd gone from house sitter to honorary neighbor to accidental resistance leader. Every few weekends, I'd visit for game nights or barbecues. At one point, they even gave me a certificate that read Guest of Honor, First Tire, First Hero. It was laminated and everything. Ridiculous, yes, but it meant a lot. One of the biggest surprises came when Mike casually mentioned that the county had launched a broader investigation into misuse of HOA funds across several districts. Apparently, Karen wasn't the only one playing fast and loose with community money. She had just been the boldest, or the dumbest, or maybe both. Her arrest had cracked open something bigger. Within a few months, 2 more HOA officials in neighboring areas were suspended pending audit. One had bought a golf cart with HOA funds and claimed it was for neighborhood security patrol. Another had installed a koi pond in their backyard, listed as a community tranquility zone. It was a wave of petty corruption, and Karen had unintentionally become the match that lit it all up. Mike and I talked about it often. He said there was something satisfying about watching small-scale corruption unravel, not because of massive stings or federal raids, but because people finally stood up and said, "That's enough." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. It was neighbors choosing accountability over apathy, choosing decency over pettiness. And weirdly enough, it all started with 4 slashed tires and a rhinestone-covered note. There was one final twist that came weeks later. I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a short typed note and a photo. The note read, "You think you won, but you only delayed the inevitable. People like me don't go away, we evolve." The photo was a blurry shot of a new HOA sign in a distant town, and beneath it stood a woman in sunglasses and a familiar salmon-colored blazer. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or frame it. I showed it to Mike and he smirked. "She's someone else's problem now," he said. "Besides, you think anyone's going to fall for that twice?" "Probably not." But it was Karen's final hiss. Her last desperate gasp of relevance. And it only confirmed what we already knew: her time here was done. That fall, the neighborhood held its first Karen-free celebration, complete with food trucks, live music, and a dunk tank. The target on the dunk tank was a cardboard cutout of Karen holding a giant HOA violation notice. People lined up to take their shot. The line stretched down the block. No one got fined for loud music. No one got letters for inappropriate lighting. There were chalk drawings all over the sidewalks, lawn chairs in every color of the rainbow, and someone even brought a pet pig named Sir Oinksalot. It was glorious. Near the end of the night, I stood by the guest parking spot, the one that started it all, and just looked at it for a moment. It was so normal now. So boring. No notes. No knives. Just a clean, empty space where any visitor could park in peace. Mike walked up next to me, drink in hand, and said, "You know, I was going to put a plaque there." I raised an eyebrow. A plaque. Yeah. Something simple. Here stood tyranny. May it never return. I laughed. That might be a bit dramatic. He shrugged. Still, it would be accurate. We stood in silence for a while, just watching families laugh and music play and the glow of string lights flicker above the party. It was peaceful. Happy. Everything Karen had tried so hard to control was now thriving because she wasn't there to strangle it with rules and threats and ego. And maybe that was the biggest lesson of it all. Sometimes, the worst people give the best communities a reason to fight for each other. Karen's reign had been awful, but it made everyone pay attention. It forced people to stop being passive and start giving a damn. It showed them how easy it is for one self-righteous person to take over when nobody speaks up, and how powerful it is when everyone finally does. I took one last look at that guest spot before heading back to the party. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just a parking space. It was a reminder that no matter how petty someone gets, no matter how high their glitter throne might sit, truth has a way of slashing through lies. One tire at a time.